Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Abi Morgan is the author of This Is Not a Pity Memoir. Abi is a playwright and screenwriter. Her plays include Skinned, Sleeping Around, Splendor, Tiny Dynamite, Tender, Fuji, 27, Love Song, and The Mistress Contract. Her television works include My Fragile Heart, Murder, Sex, Traffic, Tsunami, The Aftermath, White Girl, Royal Wedding, Birdsong, The Hour, River, and The Split. Her film writing credits include Brick Lane, Iron Lady, Shame, The Invisible Woman, and Suffragette. She has a number of films currently in development. Morgan has won a number of awards, including BAFTAs and an Emmy for her film and TV work. Abi was kind enough to do an event with me with the North Castle Public Library, which is available on YouTube. So if you Google that, you can see us chatting live about both of our memoirs. And she was so nice to me. So anyway, I just love Abi and I love this book. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Oh my God, I'm loving your book.
Oh, I loved your book.
I love your book. It's exquisite. I'm right where you've met Kyle.
Oh,
I'm really loving it. Honestly, I've been such a lovely, it's just lovely. Well done.
Oh, thank you.
Very moving. It's very moving and warm and familiar. It's just totally, I mean, I've been eating it up. So well done.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That is so nice. I absolutely loved your book. And to hear you say that is just the highest praise. So,
well, I mean, what an amazing career you've had.
Oh, sometimes I feel like I'm not doing anything right, but there are those mornings.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for saying all that. All right, well, let's talk about your book because I am obsessed with your book and just over the moon excited. All right, well, official welcome, Abi. Thank you for coming on, for talking about This Is Not a Pity Memoir, which I absolutely 100% adored, posted about, love, obsessed, everything. It's so good. And oh my gosh. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you. Well, you know that feeling of a memoir. It's both liberating and exposing.
Yes.
I've described it a little bit like when you've got slightly too drunk at a party and you tell too much. And then the next day you wake up thinking, what have I said? I feel like that's on repeat in my life at the moment. So I'm sure you know it as well, but it's a great experience, but it's also quite peculiar. So it's lovely to get that kind of response. It's incredibly reassuring to get that kind of response because there are days, I think, when one wakes up thinking, gosh, I've really spilt onto the page here.
No, but that's what makes it so good. I mean, especially because the way you tell your story, it's like, were you journaling the whole time? How do you remember all? It feels like you're so in the scenes, so immediate, as if you're like living through it as you're writing it.
Well, actually, I think the structure of the book's kind of interesting because I wrote a very kind of essential journal for the first 100 days. I mean, I'm someone who keeps notes all the time. Yeah. I record notes. I write little things. I record dialogue occasionally, when you're in a room. I think this is amazing. But I think I'd always had this kind of collage of extraordinary pieces of information my entire life. And the nature of the kind of work I've done, it's often got, I think one of the first things I did was about sex trafficking in Moldova. And I did so much research and I love research. So I think that was definitely the starting point. And I think there is, I talk about the structure of the book because I think the first 100 pages of the book has the energy of that journal. And that was very much when I was in survival mode. Whereas actually, I think the second half of the book is, was much more reflective and was based on the kind of collage of notes and images and videos I had kept, but it has a different pace for me. And that's also because it kind of marries with a different part of the journey and of the experience, I guess. The first 100 days is very much about when myself and my family are kind of thrust into this medical crisis. And so it has that sort of that energy and that adrenaline running through it. And it's very interesting when I read those journals, I was very quickly starting to switch, to the first person, to the third person the whole time. It was very interesting, the shift I was finding. So a lot of that started to actually inform the final memoir.
Wow. I should probably back up for listeners who don't know much about your book. I, of course, wanted to jump right in because I'm like, let's go deep. But maybe you could describe a little more how you got the title, which you write about in the book, and what happened to your, not even husband then, but just tell the story of what this is about.
So the memoir really opens on the morning of June 2018. I've lived with my partner, Jacob, for a kind of, at that point, nearly 18 years. We have 2 teenagers, and we have a very, very nice, quite normal, existence in living in North London in the UK. My husband's an actor. I'm a screenwriter. So everything, like any writer, we see everything through the prism of our medium. And certainly screenwriting is the prism I saw my life through often. And that morning, Jacob, who had an underlying condition of multiple sclerosis, which he's had for about 7-8 years at the time, and was very high functioning. He'd been doing a movie that week. He'd been in a TV show that week. I'd been testing his lines only a couple of nights before. He was complaining of a headache, and I had put it down to kind of rolling my eyes, man flu, but had, agreed to go off and pick up medication. But it was really the morning everything changed, because when I came back, I found Jacob collapsed on the bathroom floor. And so ensued the start of a very different kind of cataclysmic backflip in our lives. Jacob, after a period of about 2 weeks, as we watched him cognitively, psychiatrically, physically unravel, was placed into a medically induced coma. And as he was going into that coma, it was recognized that he developed something called anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, otherwise known as brain on fire. And the book really is about that period where Jacob goes into the coma, and it's about reflections on that time and how we as a family and my children and I survived. But also as the journey goes on, it's really about a reflection of how Jacob and I know each other and how we met, and really what makes up us. Because I suppose, the key element is that when Jacob woke up from the coma, whilst we were all punching the air that, my gosh, he's alive. And, although we could see there was a long way in terms of rehab for him to go, none of us had expected him to survive it. But it very quickly became apparent that, the age-old trope, which I had even joked about with my friends, which was, can you imagine if he wakes up and doesn't know who you are? Careful what you wish for, it came true. And so Jacob, within the first couple of weeks, it became apparent that he couldn't quite assess who I was. And the book really is about the moment and thereafter where he has developed a very rare delusion called Capgras delusion, which is the belief in doubles or imposters. And it's often focused on someone close to you. It can be a dog, it can be a house. But actually, with his delusion, it was focused on me. And it's about the period as Jake recovers and comes home and goes through his rehab. We acclimatize as a family, all the while Jacob doesn't know who I am. And it's really about how I reflect on the Jacob that I was with now versus the Jacob I knew in our life together, as I guess as a kind of exploration of my own identity, the identity of our relationship, when we became both very challenged, and the relationship became challenged. And the title comes really out of the very first conversation I ever had with Jacob, where in 2000, I met Jacob at a dinner party. And at the time I was a young writer. I could barely say I was writing. I'd been waitressing for so long, but I was chasing the film rights on a really beautiful book called Before I Say Goodbye, which is a collection of essays and emails by a wonderful journalist called Ruth Piketty, who sadly died at a very young age of cancer. And it's really about the last few months of her life, where she writes incredibly movingly, but with huge spirit and wit about that period. And I'd fallen into conversation with Jacob, and I happened to say, I'm trying to chase the rights on this book. And not only had he read the book, but he was very intrigued by what I was doing. And there was a very drunk girl next to him who at the time, I'd sort of was trying to navigate, but she was like, oh, I can't bear those Pity Memoirs. And the thing was, I noticed Jake went, really, I love them. And so really the book is a kind of homage really to that first conversation, but also at its heart, it's about a moment where Jacob and I met. And really, I suppose it's been at the ethos of my relationship with Jacob, which is he has always been such an advocate for me to write about my truth, but also to be quite fearless about the way I interrogate my work and the lives of others that I write about. And I guess when this happened, it was one of those conversations that really resonated for me. And as a title, in fact, it wasn't my title. It was my book agent who said, "You've got to call it this." I had one of those titles that when you scroll through, there's about 30 different versions of that title.
Wait, what was your title?
My title was What Remains. And I guess it was very much about me trying to remember, think about what remains of a relationship when something is so radically broken and changed. But I will be forever grateful that she found that title for me, because as a result, it's a little bit like the Arthur Miller line. He used to type up what the play was about and stick it on his typewriter. And for me, I guess that was a kind of an unconscious mantra. Certainly when I was living the experience of just because no one tells you. And I think it's something you capture so beautifully in your book. And I felt this relief listening to your book. And then I've oscillated between reading and listening to it, as I often do. When it gets dark and I'm tired, I flip into audio. And I find it very comforting that writing and the words become such a wonderful release. And when I see it in other people's work, I'm reminded, and I guess I feel it's okay to have done what I've done, So I really enjoyed it. And because there's so much wit in it as well as pain, and that is what life is made up, isn't it? Of, life and death, love and pain, tenderness, brutality. And I guess that's also what I wanted to try and capture and understand. I guess that's a very long answer to
I loved it. I want to just sit here and listen to you talk all day, especially when you say nice things about my book. But mostly about your own journey. It's not just that he didn't remember you, it's that he remembered there was an Abi Morgan. He just didn't think that it was you. And he would say things like, "Oh no, well, Abi Morgan did that." And you're like, "Well, I'm right here."
Yeah. It's Kafkaesque. That's the thing. I think when you're absolutely right. It's, in a way, it's a kind of writer's dream. There was always this very mercenary part of me kind of thinking, part of me was always having that conversation with the Jacob I knew, which is kind of, I cannot wait to tell you what you did. Yes, I can't wait for you to know what you did. And then I think the other part is survival. And I think as a writer, I think an essential remit in my life has been to be the observer. I found it very interesting the way you talked about alcohol in your book. And I totally identified with that. I found my voice, my personality. I felt like it turned me on. I felt like it brought me into the room. And I think essentially what writing did for me was it allowed me to be that observer, and it allowed me to communicate in the way that I could, which is quietly when no one was there. And so I think when it did happen, you're right. When Jacob first woke up, it was this kind of strange, comical navigation. I when I first found out that Jacob, it really resonated and I talk about it in the book, but it was Valentine's Day, and I'd taken in a bright red cheesy heart. Jacob and I were pretty indifferent to Valentine's Day. As I say, sometimes it was it was kind of takeout and a movie, and other times you just loathed each other, and other times you might be extravagant. It was really, you could really test the kind of temperature of the relationship. But I bought in this bright red cheesy heart, and I tied it to the end of his bed, and I went, "Hey, honey, happy Valentine's Day." And I saw two things in his face. I saw a sort of mild horror and embarrassment for me, and the very sweet nurse gave him gave him a kind of rose wrapped in cellophane, the kind of rose you get on holiday, where they bring to you at a table in a restaurant. And she said, give your wife the rose. And I remember he just looked at me and went, "She's not my wife." And even then, the bartering goes on inside. I was like, okay, he means, yeah, of course I'm not married. He means his girlfriend. But actually, it was a real profound moment for me. And I talk about shaking, and I remember coming down the stairs and sort of touching the walls going, it can't be the underground, we're 4 stories up, but it felt like it was, the subway underneath my feet. And I think it was just shock. But very quickly, I started to, you navigate, you negotiate, you barter, you're intrigued, you provoke. And one of the things it became apparent was that when you started to question Jacob's thinking, it's called confabulation, they call it, which is when you kind of confabulate this story. And it often runs with brain injuries, because, somebody who has an injured brain is trying to make sense of the world. And, Jacob's brain had gone through this massive kind of continual seizuring period for 6 months. And so I knew there was a lot of rebuilding, and the doctors were trying to work out where the damage was. And so in a way, part of my conversations was trying to map out what was going on here. And so it became apparent quite quickly that he had devised this idea that, I'd say, where's she gone? And he was referred to me as Abi and her as Abi Morgan. And he would say, she's gone away. She's got a new life with someone else. And at the time, I remember thinking, my God, I'd be so lucky right now. I kind of, and when I sort of dug deeper, he developed this idea that we were living in, he now had a beautiful apartment and it was in Hampstead. And this was somewhere that Jake and I often used to say, when the kids have flown the nest, we're going to buy an apartment. It's going to overlook Hampstead Heath is a beautiful part of North London. We live near it. We have to walk there and, we'll be able to look over the heath. And so it was this strangely kind of painful yet tender sort of story, I realized he told himself. And over that time, it then very quickly evolved into him. He was very intrigued, sometimes concerned why I was so interested in his children. And I would say, well, look, they're very nice children. They're great kids, and I think for everyone around us, for his poor family, for my family, for our children, they just, at first, no one could believe it because it was so absurd. But then he would obviously, pull people aside and say, how are you falling for it? She's clearly not Abi Morgan. And so there was this sort of strange madness to it. But I very quickly realized that, there was a way to Jacob's heart, and it was cake and smoothies. And, The Guardian and the Sunday Times and, the latest Netflix box set and company and making him laugh. And so within the first few weeks, he suddenly said to me one day, you must be working for the state. And I said, yeah. And he said, so the state's employed you to come and help me? And I said, yeah, I've been employed to come and help you and the children. And when that happened, there was a shift and he kind of started to accept that I did feel like I was slightly treated like, the kind of the hired help. There was a sort of strange relationship. So, when other family members would arrive, he would ask me to wait outside. Thank you very much. You can go outside now. So there was and as the book clearly captures, I'm navigating my way through, moments of real insanity and rage and fury and yet, I think it's something else that, I also think you talk about in your book, and it's a very simple, and in some ways I think it's something I refer to, and I worry it was a platitude, but when I heard it in your book, I was really reassured, which is all we are left with is love. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I call it a hum. Mm-hmm. And I just always, even when it was in the hardest moments with Jacob, I just had this huge hum of feeling for him. Even talking about it now, it's still, I can't describe it. It's, I think perhaps the only really unconditional love one has is for one's children. But I was reading recently the kind of Greek idea of 7 kinds of love. And there is that love that, and they're fascinating from eros to agape to, lots of, but one of the loves they talk about is a love that has been there for a long time that dissolves into something unconditional. And I realized that there was something quite unconditional. And it wasn't just because Jacob was my partner or the father of my children. It was as a human being, and I felt very profoundly connected that, it became apparent to me that Jacob may not come back to me, but there was a way of getting him back to himself, and so that really became the focus and the drive. And I guess it was distilled for me once we brought Jacob home. And, our home is very important. We always laugh because each floor of our house has been renovated based on a different movie. I'm a screenwriter, so based on a different movie that I've managed to finally get away. So, we've got the book is built on a drama I did about the tsunami and how the tsunami happened. And then, the ground floor was renovated that because, I managed to get the Iron Lady, which is a Margaret Thatcher film. We call it the suffragette wing, our bedroom. So different floors have different resonance, but it's a house very much that Jake and I have built together, but really he has. And so coming back to the bones of our house, I was hoping that would start to help locate me in that world. But then it was a very clear moment within the first few weeks where we were standing in the hallway and I was taking Jacob back into hospital to see a consultant. And at that point, Jacob, it was very difficult for Jacob to physically move. And so I'd managed to prop him up against a wall. And if you've raised a child, then when you deal with someone in this condition, there are lots of similarities. So I propped him up. I managed to clear him of, toast crumbs. And I was getting him his coat. And I just saw him look at himself in the hallway mirror. And I just saw this look. And I just pointed at his reflection. I said, who is that? And he just said, I don't know. And in that moment, it was like a penny drop. And I thought, okay, it's not that he doesn't know me, he doesn't know himself. And if he can find out himself, then he'll find me. And I guess that was just the guiding light for me, the principle of the whole thing. And so, yeah, I mean, so the book is also about that. You know, it's certainly not a journey I do on my own. It's a journey that, my gosh, you know, we were very lucky. You know, I'm not Jewish. Jake is Jewish, again, something I loved in your book, that sort of the ishness, the ish that I've come to love in our life, actually, that we're a bit ish. But, you know, we were very helped by our families, our friends, and those people around us. But it's the journey of negotiation as I sort of help, and we help Jake negotiate and find himself. And in finding himself, the hope was that he would find me again, I guess. That was it.
Oh my gosh. There was this one moment when he went out to lunch with a friend, and he came back and the friend was like, well, he's a nice bloke. It's not Jacob, but this man seems nice. And I feel like that's how you all were treating him, and yet still embracing everything. I mean, you talk about all the feelings of how you cope with this, from the unexpected, like moments where you are bored, right? You're like, it's boring. No one talks about this, and all the other things no one talks about. But what I kept looking for is, where is the moment where she's like, I can't do this anymore. Like, he thinks Abi Morgan already left. Like, let me just get out of here. Like, but there was none of that. And I was like, is she ever going to reach the point where she's like, I cannot do this. This is, you know, because any rational person reading this could be like, how can you do this? How can anybody in this situation not want to just, you know, melt down or leave or whatever? And of course you stay. Like, and even that when he said early on, like, don't ever let me be in this spot. Like, at first when I was reading it, I was like, oh, he's just mad at her because he realizes that you didn't listen when he said he didn't ever want to be in a position where you would have to take care of him. I was like, oh, that's why he's giving her this side eye in the hospital. It's not that he doesn't remember her. But then, of course, we quickly realized that it is what that is. So did you ever think, like, I'm just going to get out of here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's something that people have said to you, you're so brave, you're so strong. You know, they say, yes. You know, and it's very kind, and, you know, the kind of raging kind of narcissist to me goes, yes. But actually, yeah, I mean, it's not that I didn't not. I mean, I definitely had my absolute breakage moments. And in fact, you know, there's a long bit of the story still to go that we're involved, you know, that I'm in now. And, you know, no one tells you that there's a continual renegotiation of the self and who you are as a couple, you know, when you go through that and get to a better place. I guess, you know, I felt like my kids weren't quite cooked. And, you know, I grew up, I came from divorce. I have a very strong mother. I grew up with a lot of women around me. It's not that I was ever or have been frightened of being on my own, although who isn't at times frightened of being their own? I wouldn't want to kind of sugarcoat that. But I think it was so immediate, the need to kind of try and bring Jake back. But also I think it was about my ego. I honestly think, you know, I was a bit like a spurned lover who was like, you are going to work out that you've made the most terrible mistake. So I think that was, I honestly do. I think there was this indignation in me. I've got ADD, and it's really weird, but I spend a lot of time trying to calm the voices in my head. So I think I'm probably well-versed in how to negotiate those different voices. And I think it's something, you know, one of the things in the book, I mean, what's really interesting, Jacob has never read the book. And I've written the book in many ways for him. You know, I speak to him often. It's often to you. And I sometimes, I do think, I do, you know, on my worst days, I think, God, I wonder if he's going to leave me when he finally reads this book. Because, you know, I do talk about those bleak moments, those dark moments, those days where I'm like, there are days, you know, when he looked like he was going to die. And there are days when he lived. And I really questioned whether it was the right thing for him. It was the right thing for me, you know, whether we were going to survive it. So it's not that there isn't the most ugly, you know, darkest parts of myself out there. So I'm certainly not a saint. But I guess it's what I said before, you know, in a weird way, it's that it was bigger than me. And, you know, Jacob, it's an energy. You know, you talk about it in your book, you know, that kind of, that superhero paching, and I can't describe it. And it's something that I'm almost loath to tell my children, because I don't want, you know, I think, well, maybe it was just distinctive to me. But when I first met Jake, I talk about it in the book, there was just this internal ping. And it wasn't just a ping of like, here's an attractive guy, here's somebody who I think is attracted to me. it was deeper than that. This was someone I just wanted to be around. This was a warmth. This was a spirit. This was good. And I had been around and attracted to the other. I had like thrown myself at narcissists and, mainly men who really weren't that interested in me, and actually to be with someone who was warm and open-hearted, not just to me, but to the world. That was what I wanted to bring back. That's the hum. It's a bigger hum than him. And it's something I think about a lot. And I've had to think about and continue to think about because, this survival story is not over, that actually it's always been about making sure that he will carry on in the world, relationships that he has formed, be it with his children and his family, but also with me, will carry on. But it may not always be in the most traditional sense. So when I slightly let go of needing him to come back for me, and then really digging into what I felt about him, then I found my way back. And, it was also, there were tiny little moments with Jake the whole time, the dry sense of humor. Jake's got the most beautiful sense of humor. And he was always, I talk about it in the film. I remember going, first date, we went to see a Bridget Jones film, and I was so embarrassed because he laughed so loud. And I was almost turning around apologizing to people. I'm so sorry. And then I realized that actually what he was doing was he was triggering the laughter. Sometimes when we go to stand-up shows with Jake, and I used to see that the comics would react to him. And you could almost see them going like smart. I can see they like it. He does something. And, Jake and I are in New York now and this weekend, and we went to see Into the Woods last night, the Sondheim. He's a massive Sondheim fan. And he was up and cheering. And I was just like, oh my gosh. But actually there is a joy giver to him. And he also has as many irritating traits as everybody does. But that became the focus, I guess. And so that feels like the great achievement, actually. The great achievement is that Jake is up now and standing and there and present. And, he said to me last night, God, I'm here. You got us here. And that to me was like, yeah, there's something bigger than our relationship. And that is the conversation that I'm having now. That conversation I'm having now is like, what now? But it's always been about trying to get him back. And then when something is so life and death, I think, I talk about deadlines, more than anyone. I live with adrenalized deadlines. I'm terrible for deadlines. I'm always like, yeah, it's going really well. I'm really excited. I'm just on the last 10 pages and I haven't even started it. I'm always going, yeah, just give me till Monday. And I'm like, bam. So I was used to deadlines, but I had forgotten the ultimate deadline, which is mortality. And so, his mortality was threatened. And then I guess the other truly wobbly kind of what I would have cut plot twist was that my own mortality hit a moment where, God, I think we were like 5. Jacob had woken up in the sort of end of January, beginning of February. Medically induced comas are interesting because you ebb and flow. You don't come out. It's not like, ting, I'm here. It's the waking and it's going to sleep and the waking and then the process of bringing someone around. So then we went into sort of like the reeling of not quite knowing who I was. And then I got to about April, May, and I started to feel this incredible pain in my chest. And
but I almost don't want you to say it because when I read it, I was so shocked.
It's so annoying. I mean, I
could not believe what was going on. Like all of the things were like, it was like the biggest plot twist and because I try not to read the flap before I start reading. Like I don't want to know what's happening. Yeah. So I almost don't want you to give away. But just to say, I could not believe it. It was like, there was one moment where you just said you looked as sort of lopsided and as wobbly and exposed as you felt. And like that image of you and how you felt right then. Oh my gosh. It's just, it's hard to read this without wanting to give you like a massive hug.
Oh, I know. And I do, I think about that a lot. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I am so acutely aware now, I'm sure you are, of people's stories, people's tragedies, people's pain, and I never feel like I want to totally colonize it. I think, it's interesting. Your book is, every chapter has books that you've loved, and some I've read and most I haven't, and some I pretend I've read. There's millions of, but they're stories, and I came to us that ours was another story, and I really believe that, and I love, I mentor a lot of particularly young women coming up, and one of the things I learned very early on is that you have to kind of kiss the joy and let it fly. There's a desire when you mentor a person, and when they become successful, to go, I know, I taught her all I know, And actually the joy with it is let someone go and be their own thing. And that's what I sort of feel like with this story. It was one of the things I felt when I was writing it. I felt like whatever the criticism is, whatever anyone says about it, it will just be another book on the shelf, and there'll be another great story to read. And I can hide it between other stories. But when this story then got hit by these continual plot twists, I felt this very strange discomfort with it, actually. Not mainly because I just felt like I almost wanted to apologize to the reader and go, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this bit. I don't want you to, because I didn't want to seem like greedy or like I was milking it but then I think sometimes life happens like this, doesn't it? You don't just get these very neat. I think there's a lot of boring gray, a lot of lovely, and then there's suddenly like explosions, as you know, and then there's the quiet period again. And then, but you never, once you've gone through that period, you never don't look over your shoulder slightly thinking, when's it coming again,
So true.
I think, I talk about chaos being my natural state, but I definitely find that feeling sometimes where I'm like, okay, today in this moment, everybody's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're okay. We're all okay. I'm sure you're counting heads. You've got 4 children. You can't. I spend most mornings. I wake up going, okay, Mabel's there, Jesse's there. Okay, Jake's okay. And it still feels quite new. That feeling.
Oh my gosh. I feel like we only scratched the surface. I had 8,000 more parts of your book I wanted to talk about, but this is the time I allot to podcasts because people stop listening after half an hour. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Zibby. Lovely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.